initiation. And it's so cool because there's this moment of exploring our subconscious. So we're doing subconscious work, we're doing somatic work, and they're like, oh my God, this whole thing in my head is just my mom. And it's like in that moment we get this separation, a little bit of separation. And then for weeks you'll start to be like, oh my God, that voice is everywhere. Like my mom is literally everywhere, but this is not helpful. Like I don't want this criticizing voice or whatever it is. Like it's just dictating everything from me. And then we get to look at like, okay, what's the need that was missing originally? How can we get that need met now? Hi, welcome into another video. In this video, we're going to talk about the 7 or 8 dynamics that can play out between a mother and daughter that kind of cause some of our core wounds. This is not to hate on our moms, okay? That's not what we're here to do. And it's our responsibility to work with whatever is in our system and to transmute it into love and allow you to become the most confident, empowered, loving woman that you can possibly be. So in the last video, I talked about healing the father wound. Today, we get to talk about healing the mother wound. As you can imagine, your relationship to your mother is incredibly influential, incredibly complex in a lot of ways. So we're going to explore, as I said, similar to the last episode, different dynamics, how that shows up, how it affects the daughter, you in this case, and then some stories and examples to sort of illustrate those dynamics as well. So you can see where you might have patterns from different ones. You're probably going to notice, oh, there's a little bit of that, there's a little bit of this. So just want you to hang with me through the whole thing. And at the end, you'll be able to piece it together, and I will explain what it looks like to start to repair some things that might need repairing in this relationship or as a result of this relationship. Again, these 2 episodes are not to make our parents seem bad or wrong, but what we're really doing is looking at how it affected you, how it made you feel, and how we can work with that. So, starting in number 1 with the overprotective mother. This is going to be exactly how it sounds. So, a mother who is really excessively protecting, but also controlling. And when that's happening, when the mother's making all the decisions, there can also be, in some examples that I can think of, this idea where the mom almost feels like the daughter is incapable. So she might preface you to people like, oh, she's really shy, or she's really sensitive, or she's really this or that. And as a child, when you hear your mother saying that, you have no other choice but to kind of take that on as part of your identity, right? Before we're 7 years old, we barely have the ability to sort through like, who am I versus who's my mother? And so we're just going to take in like a sponge. So if we're growing up with someone who tells us what our identity is in a way that's like keeping us small, then of course, as we age and come into adulthood, we might struggle with independence, with our self-confidence, with decision-making. There might be a lot of internal confusion of, am I actually shy? Or maybe I'm not like that, but it seems like I'm like that. And now other people in my experience tell me I'm like that too, because inevitably you're probably acting it out on some level or you're presenting that way. This dynamic can also create anxiety within ourselves, which causes fear of taking risks or feeling incapable of handling challenges without kind of like our mother's intervention. And on a more tangible level, this might show up in a dynamic where you're checking in with your mom a lot, constantly calling her, kind of feeling like you're stuck under her authority. If you're planning a trip for yourself or a big decision or buying a car, there's part of you that's like, well, I should run this by mom. I have to check in with my mom. What would my mom say? And it can also show up in how you take care of yourself, how you dress yourself, because she was always overbearing with those little decisions. So in that thread, but a little bit different, is the critical mother. This is number 2. This comes with control as well, but there's also this tone and vibe of criticizing you. And usually when there's criticism, there's also not very much praise. So where I see this in the moms of the clients that I have, it's the mom is often criticizing the daughter's weight or her hair or how she looks or the clothes that she chooses or the men that she chooses, the job that she chooses. it's like nothing the daughter does is good enough. So when that's the messaging to you, then of course it's going to be really hard to develop a healthy sense of self-esteem. And this can also turn into intense perfectionism tendencies, really trying to get it right, really trying to get it perfect, because that part of you is seeking praise from your mother ultimately. So that part of us can drive us to seek validation, can really create a big fear of failure, fear of getting it wrong, fear of feeling that same criticism that we experienced as a child. That was obviously painful. And then what often happens is the more that we fear that happening, the more we sometimes tend to attract it, right? I say this often: what we resist persists. What we are afraid of, we often manifest into our reality. So we have to really sort of clean up those energies within ourselves so that we aren't so intimidated by this risk of potential failure. And that's going to also have anxiety that comes along with it. And depending on the amount of damage to your self-esteem as a child, this can also show up as depression, or you might experience a really intense inner critic within yourself. So sometimes our parents actually mature and change and grow, and yet that inner critic within your mom that may have showed up within her when she was in her 30s or 40s raising you, she has now potentially grown out of that. But because it's so embedded in you, you still have the same thought process or the same pattern within your mind that is your own inner criticizing. And you may see how this leaks out into criticizing others, because sometimes we take on our parents' behaviors as the right thing to do, and then we end up doing the same thing that our parents did. On the other hand, sometimes in this dynamic, we see a rebellious behavior, which is, I'm not going to take care of how I look. I'm not going to take care of the clothes that I wear. I'm going to eat whatever I want. I'm going to not take care of my physical health, as a rebellion towards the mom that tried to over criticize and over control. It's kind of like this, I can do whatever I want. And we sometimes get stuck in this inner teenager rebellion. And when we don't realize that's why it's playing out, then there's probably an adult part of ourselves that's like, I wish I took care of myself more. I wish I didn't feel so shitty. I wish I did this. Meanwhile, the criticism is like still coming in. So it's a tricky one to break out of, because that rebellion is sort of your defense system. It's your way of trying to get a sense of your own choice, your own autonomy. But when that coping mechanism is actually creating choices that are harmful to you, that's when we want to learn how to redirect that energy in a better way, because gaining your own sense of control and autonomy is important, but we want it to be serving your growth and your feeling good and your highest good. So the third example is the emotionally unavailable mother. So that's going to be a mother who is physically present with you, physically around in the home. Maybe she's even doing the cooking and the cleaning, but she's emotionally distant. So you as the child can definitely sense this closedness. Probably notice that she doesn't really share her emotions, that she feels kind of cold. She might be like saying it's fine, everything's fine, but there's a rigidity within her that you can feel. And as a young child, this is going to translate to a sense of abandonment, because the child cannot feel emotionally the depth and the emotional qualities of the mother, because her defense system has closed her off from her emotional body. So that's going to feel really hard for you when you're trying to connect to your mother on a level that's different than just a talking level, but like an energetic feeling level. So in this case, the daughter may end up feeling neglected or feeling unworthy of love, depending on the relationship with physical touch. It could end up being really hard if there wasn't any warmth, close, nurturing touch in your home. And if that was missing, then maybe it's something you really deeply crave and you feel like I can't get enough of it, and I want to like touch other people all the time, like maybe even pushing people's boundaries because you're trying to get this need met. It can also be hard to form emotional connections with other people if you've been shown that a woman should be buttoned up and zipped up and closed, or however you see it. And that can, of course, turn into feelings of feeling lonely, feeling not seen, difficulty trusting other people, depending, again, on kind of like the flavor of how it showed up. from your own mother. Not sure if I have this in another example, but what's coming up for me right now is that our mother, I just want to remind you that our mother is the epitome of what we think it is to be a woman, right? It's really important for us to take a step back and consider, what did I learn from my mother about what it means to be a woman and how I'm supposed to show up as a woman? The fourth example is the enmeshed mother. This is also like the mom who is the best friend of the daughter, or sees her daughter as a friend, or whenever I hear someone say, my mom's my best friend, I always get kind of like a little weary of that statement, because what can happen is when the mother is overly involved in the daughter's life to a point of lacking boundaries and lacking clarity between who is the adult and who is the child, it creates this confusion within the child. And sometimes the child doesn't understand, what is my role here? What are my responsibilities? It might feel really nice to have this very open relationship with your mom. Like, I can tell her everything. She doesn't judge me. She doesn't get mad at me. Like, she's the cool, chill mom. But then when you're growing up, you might struggle with any sort of authority or structure or boundaries in other areas of your life, because there wasn't containment when you were young from this parent. You were allowed to do whatever you wanted. And maybe when you're a kid that's like going out late and whatever, you could just get away with it, which is cool and fine and fun in a lot of ways. But there's this missing part of structure and containment and feeling safe, which is really important for a child. So if your mother doesn't have this boundariedness with you, then you can be her friend, but can you actually lean on her? Do you feel like you can count on her? Is she the one providing, guidance? There can be a little bit of that missing there. Another way that this can show up is her kind of like emotionally dumping on you. So that could be complaining about your father, or just like really needing you for emotional support, which actually the healthier way would be to be getting emotional support from her own friends or family or therapist, and not from the child. So instead of being overprotective on the other end of the spectrum, this is like a friend relationship, which really blurs the lines. Especially sometimes it can get a little more messy if the mom is also using the friendship against the daughter. And that might show up later in teenage years of, oh, you never spend time with me, you're always with your friends, I do all this stuff for you, I let your friends come over, why aren't you spending time with me? Sort of like a victim mentality coming from the mother. She might get jealous if the daughter has other friends or even another partner. And in the early years, like I said, this can result in the child also taking on like a parent-like role. So you might be holding space for your mother's emotions, holding space for her needs, or feeling like there's not really someone there for you to fully lean into. And that can start to feel unsafe because we don't sense stability from our mother, and we need stability. And unfortunately, this enmeshment dynamic is even more common in situations of divorce. Like I feel like I briefly mentioned it. So now this daughter might not even have a father that's providing structure or trust, and now neither is her mother, so she becomes really responsible for the emotional experience of the mother, and that also creates a codependent relationship. And when we think about that daughter going into adult relationships, she might always feel guilty about spending time with other people or even pursuing romantic relationship, or she might act out a similar role in romantic relationships or friendships where you find yourself always being the space holder, being the parent in your relationship because you had to be the parent in some ways to your mother. Okay, fifth example is a narcissistic mother. I also put addict mother sort of in the same category. So we're just talking about someone who has narcissistic tendencies or addictive tendencies. And the underlying theme in both of those is a mother who is ultimately prioritizing her own needs and desires over the children. There can also be so much different type of manipulation that happens here. The relationship in these dynamics tends to feel very push and pull, lots of highs and lows. And so a daughter growing up in that environment might feel really not chosen, really unloved, undervalued, And we're probably going to become very hyper vigilant, because when we are navigating, relating to someone who has their own emotional volatility that's so intense, we have to be very on guard for what type of mood they might be in. So there's probably a part of you that just knows, based on the way your mom answers the phone or closes the door, what's going on with her, right? Your brain is already telling you this bigger picture of like what type of mood she might be in, for example. So there's this hypervigilance that comes there into our nervous system. And then we might also develop a lot of people-pleasing behaviors and have difficulty asserting ourselves in relationship, because this type of person who is experiencing addiction or has narcissistic tendencies tends to also come with a lot of power play and also be really like not in themselves. Like it's kind of like this feeling for the daughter of like, where are you, because they are dissociated or numb or lost in this other thing, or like so worried about power and control that there isn't really a true presence coming from them very often. And so in order to keep yourself safe as a child in that dynamic, you will likely have to choose to fawn or freeze in order to try and feel regulated or feel safe within yourself. And so that's going to translate into relationships down the line, which could leave you feeling really helpless, out of control a lot of times. You can't actually fix things. It can be quite a devastating experience, because you're really giving your energy in a lot of ways, and it becomes very unboundaried for you, really leaky boundaries, and yet still you don't ultimately have the control that you want to get. So now I've put the supportive mother. So this is the secure mother, the mother that raises a secure child. I want to put it in here, and I don't think I put it in the father one, but I want to put it in here to show, like, in a perfect world, just to highlight what we actually need as girls growing up in order to develop into a woman with a secure attachment style. So in this case, the supportive mother is the mother who provides a balance in support and encouragement. Basically, there are boundaries and there are rules, but the daughter can feel safe enough to come to her mom with things when she's confused or she doesn't know, feeling safe to come for advice. And in this case, you would also know that your mom is self-sufficient, that she has her own support system. Ideally, we see our parents in a supportive relationship together, but also that they are supported by their community, that they're part of the community. We get a sense that they belong and that we belong in our family or in our community. And finally, we are experiencing a mother who's in the wisdom of her body and her feminine energy. And I think that this is one that often gets, it doesn't get as much attention, I guess, because it seems like a nice to have sort of thing in terms of feminine energy and creativity. But actually, if our goal is to feel so good inside our body and to feel life force and feel alive and feel like we can thrive and feel happy, then we do have to know how to be in our feminine energy, and more importantly, be able to be in both our masculine and feminine. This is something that I teach within my Becoming Secure community. There's like many modules and exercises and somatic ways to feel and balance these energies within ourselves. And if we don't know how to balance them, they will be unbalanced. And it's pretty common for women who had to be really independent or became independent to be more in their masculine. It can be hard to soften into this feminine energy, but it is in our feminine that we open, we soften, we receive, we feel full, we feel loving, we feel like we can share and be generous without resentment, without it coming from like a fawn, people-pleasing response. So it's with a healthy boundary. So in the supportive mother role, she's in the wisdom of her body. She's the oracle of the family. She knows what people need. She's able to give generously. She's able to be emotionally available and pour into her family and be like devotional, but with ease. And that comes from really taking care of herself. And that is ultimately what we want our daughters to see and learn from us, right? So in this case, the effect on the daughter is that the daughter develops healthy self-esteem, a sense of healthy independence, also resilience, so that anxiety is replaced by resilience and an ability to take risks and do hard things, because that girl, that daughter, knows she has a foundation to come back to. She has a parent that will support her, hopefully two parents that will support her, and she can expand herself and expand her energy without feeling like there's going to be criticism. She can take up space. There's not going to be jealousy from the mother or closing or like needing to be small from her to compensate for her mother's insecurities. And when you have that, of course, that's going to also lead to positive romantic relationships and just a generally strong sense of self. And again, you might see some of these things from your own mom in different each woman is holding so many different archetypes within herself. So you might see some of those secure qualities, and you might see something from another dynamic as well. And the point is that I give you different patterns so that you can figure out your own map, your own map that is you and what's happening in your system and how you're relating to the world because of this. So I have two more. The next one is the absent mother. So this includes a mother that was either physically absent due to working a lot, due to a separation, or of course a mother that passed away. So without our mom in the picture, depending on how young we were, the daughter is going to experience feelings of abandonment. When we're young, we literally don't even know that we're separate beings from our mom. So anytime she's separate from us, there's this fear kind of and worry and abandonment that comes into the body. And so you can imagine that the more extreme this is, the more that feeling of abandonment is going to come out and be deep. And so when we feel abandoned or are neglected, we will struggle with attachment issues. That is going to create an anxious or avoidant or disorganized attachment style, which turns into difficulty forming secure relationships in adulthood, and this underlying sort of persistent sense of loss or fear of being left or feeling alone, especially if there wasn't time for healing during the loss. So if there was a death, if your mom passed, or a separation where she walked out and she didn't come back, and there wasn't really room to grieve that through your body because your dad or whoever took care of you didn't know how to do it, or they didn't make space for it, and people just tried to move on, and you thought, I just need to get over it, she's not coming back, that is going to be harbored within your body. So when I work with clients who are grown up now but lost their mom at a young age, we do have to spend some time feeling through that loss, because that loss shows up all through life. You know, it's there on every Mother's Day, every big life milestone, and that is going to continue to be a potential space within you, something that's just worth spending time with yourself to make sure that you're getting the nurturing that part of your soul needs in other ways, whether it's from yourself, a support system, another healthy female figure in your life. Sometimes when we have the absent mother, we tend to seek out female figures in our life that can replace that, but sometimes we end up seeking out females that replace it in not the most healthy way. So either we feel super anxious to get the validation from a female role model, or we find someone that mirrors the behavior of our mom that might not have been super ideal, which creates another painful dynamic. So we really need to take time to come into the knowing of like what's been missing and offer the deepest, purest compassion and nourishing that the mothering energy should be filling us with. Okay, those are actually all my examples. I had written down emotionally immature mother, but that's kind of the same as enmeshed mother. So that's when our mother doesn't really have a lot of self-responsibility for her emotions, and it gets kind of put on the daughter and then translated to the daughter potentially. So let's go through a couple examples. I'm going to paint the picture, tell a little story, and then I'll explain to you what it might look like to start to heal from this type of dynamic, because what we want to do is be able to basically come into your full self-assured version of yourself. And when we're carrying around belief systems and conditioning from our mother, that's what's going to get in the way. So we just have to work to separate from and heal from whatever is there. And this is like basically an initiation process that we never got. So there are important milestones within a child's life where we start to individuate from our parents. And if that's not happening if it's not happening, period. And I'm just thinking, in other cultures, they sometimes have a lot of actual ceremony and events around these things. Like there is a ceremony around coming into maturation as a teenager that teaches them in that ceremony, like you are an independent person and you're responsible for that and you're your own person and all these things. And in Western society, for sure, we just don't really have that. I mean, maybe depending on the religion that you're in, but anyway, what I'm trying to point to is that there are initiations required that often get missed. And when I start to do somatic work with clients, is they go through that initiation, and it's so cool because there's this moment of exploring our subconscious. So we're doing subconscious work, we're doing somatic work, and they're like, oh my God, this whole thing in my head is just my mom. And it's like in that moment, we get this separation, a little bit of separation. And then for weeks, you'll start to be like, oh my God, that voice is everywhere. Like my mom is literally everywhere, but this is not helpful. Like I don't want this criticizing voice or whatever it is. Like it's just dictating everything from me. And then we get to look at like, okay, what's the need that was missing originally? How can we get that need met now? How can I give this to myself now? And it's like, then there's this moment of feeling very vulnerable. Like who am I without this pattern that's come from my mom? Who am I without this energetic attachment to this thing that, it feels like it's your literal mother, but it's not. It's just an imprint and a condition she gave you. And then that vulnerability is feeling yourself separate from those rules or conditions that part of us really believed was right, but that part that really believed it's right is just the inner child that is scared to do the wrong thing or scared to get in trouble. So when we let that fall away, you get to feel who you are underneath, which on one hand is vulnerable, but on the other hand is like, so it will just feel so much like you and all of this capability. We have to do the work to get there. That's not just going to happen from you listening to me say it out loud, but when I see it and get to witness it and be the witness of that transformation and that initiation happening in my clients, it's so powerful. And it's like, that's what coming into womanhood is. That is how we mature from, maiden to wife or maiden to mother in a really, really real maturing way. Okay, so we're going to go into a tangible example, which is a daughter with a really critical mother. So let's call the daughter Emily. Emily is a bright and ambitious young woman who excelled in academics and extracurricular activities. However, no matter how much she did, her mom always found something to criticize. A less than perfect grade, a missed goal in soccer, mom was never satisfied. So she worked tirelessly to win her mother's approval. She became a perfectionist, believing that if she could just be perfect, her mother would finally praise her. But the praise never came. So Emily grew up feeling like she wasn't good enough. And now in adulthood, Emily carries these feelings of inadequacy into her relationships and into her career. She constantly sought validation from her boss and her colleagues, and she constantly worried that any mistake would confirm her deepest fear that she was unworthy. So if Emily now were to go into her healing era and come into this work and want to reflect on this, she would need to start to, one, understand that her mother's criticism is much more about her mom than her. This is a mom that's projecting her own insecurities onto her daughter. Second layer there is reframing your own self-perception. So you have to recognize that your achievements and your worth are independent of your mother's approval or your boss's approval or your friend's approval, and that is worth celebrating because it's worth celebrating. It's just like, it's completely separate. You achieved that. And when we can separate from that, we can start to see, okay, where did I do that for my mom's approval versus where am I doing what I actually want to do? And if what I actually want to do is sail across the ocean, then that's what's actually going to give me the deep approval that I want. But what I'm trying to do is what I think I should do in order to get the surface level approval from other people, in order to feel like I can fulfill my mom's approval or lack of approval. In that process of reframing your own self-perception, there has to be self-compassion. We have to work on the part of us that is afraid to make mistakes, and therefore allow ourselves to make mistakes, allow ourselves to explore what we might like, allow ourselves to ask when we don't understand something without this harsh self-judgment and critical tone. We have to offer ourselves a lot of patience and almost treat ourselves like the little girl who didn't get to freely express, who was always under this microscope. What does she need? She needs patience, she needs space, she needs invitations to play. And ultimately, there might also be a scenario to creating space from interactions for a little while, or just naming that you are unwilling to have conversations with her if they're going to be critical of you. As a human, you just don't have to tolerate that behavior from another person. It doesn't matter if it's your mother, right? So you do have basically the right to just not engage in that anymore. And of course, that might create some pushback and tension, but it doesn't have to be delivered in a mean way. It can just be delivered as a loving boundary. Okay, second example. For this one, I wanted to create one that was more of a mix. So in this example, first we have the mother, Diane, and Diane she carries a lot of resentment about how her life turned out, and she sort of puts that as guilt onto her kids. So the story is that Laura, the daughter, grew up in a household where her mother, Diane, often spoke of the opportunities she missed. Diane had married young, forgoing a promising career to raise a family. And though she believed she should be happy with her life choices, she couldn't shake the resentment that lingered beneath the surface. So she projected her insecurities onto Laura, constantly reminding her of the sacrifices that she made. She would say things like, I gave up so much for you. You better make sure that it's worth it. And this leaves Laura feeling an overwhelming pressure to have to exceed in every area of her life, to have to make decisions that would please her mom, and also believing that her achievements would maybe make up for her mother's loss, as if it was her responsibility to do that. So then Laura goes on to excel academically and pursue a high-powered career, but always still felt a sense of a nagging sense of guilt or inadequacy. No matter how much she achieved, it seemed like it was never enough to alleviate her mother's resentment of her own life choices. And it's very interesting, right? Because you can see that in this case, the daughter is working to try and lift this pain from her mom that her mom is carrying, even though her mom is the one carrying the pain. So no matter what, if her mom is in a story of resentment of her own life, it won't matter what Laura does, Diane will still feel that way. Even if for a moment Diane feels proud that Laura went on to have this high-powered job, it's still Diane's own thing, her own resentment, so she would have to work through that. So those subtle criticisms and the little guilt trips and emotional manipulation are going to leave the daughter really struggling with her own worth, and is she doing the right thing? Is she doing enough? Because no matter how much she does, the mother doesn't get relieved, basically. On top of that, Laura might also pursue a path that she doesn't even want in order to try and appease her mother. Or she might have a whole story about being a mom and raising kids is bad because she watched her mom kind of resent choosing the life of motherhood when she could have had a career, could have had all of these other things. And then I feel like, just to add to the stereotype of this mother, at family gatherings, she puts on this very happy facade, but Laura can still feel that tension within her mom. And that tension creates more volatility at home, making Laura really anxious to her mom's state and really hypervigilant to her mom's state. Now, when she's in adult relationships, she's going to find herself in romantic partnerships where she feels like she's walking on eggshells, fearing confrontation, trying to avoid conflict, this how can I make him love me feeling happening all the time. So in Laura's journey to separate and heal from that, her first step is to begin to understand the impact of her mother's unfulfilled dreams and acknowledge the resentment that her mother has of her own life, right? Just understanding the impact that had on her. Second to that is starting to separate her identity and her worth from her mother's expectations or perceived expectations and emotional state. Then after that, we start to set clear boundaries and really recognize, as Laura, she's not responsible for her mother's happiness. And when that's been part of your subconscious for 30 years, that's going to be something that you have to consciously separate from. See where you're letting your energy collapse back into that or leak into that and pulling it back to yourself. Ultimately, it's also going to be important for Laura to build a supportive network of friends and mentors who encourage her to embrace who she actually is and what she wants to choose in life. And she has to feel like she can be herself around people and pursue the path that's authentic to her instead of trying to resolve something for her mom. So I hope that those two examples and stories sort of painted an even more clear example of what this looks like and how it looks to really come back into yourself so that you can be the secure version of yourself without these sneaky little projections and things that are playing out through our subconscious. So as with a lot of these videos, I have a practice inside the Becoming Secure membership. And in this case, this is a pretty extensive one where we get to sort of look at your relationship to the feminine in general, what it means to be a woman to you. And then there's a pretty deep and powerful clearing exercise and boundary exercise that, of course, can just stay within your own journal, your own Google Doc, but it might also give you a really beautiful framework to bring into a conversation with your mother if you wanted to. But ultimately, it's a place for you to go into that exercise, put some music on, spend some time journaling, which I know is probably something that you want to do, and really map this out for yourself so that you can see what's happening, not just from hearing me say it, like, oh yeah, that's kind of me, but like these questions will really help you get clear on what it is for you and what your steps are, and then how you can actually kind of dismantle that. Plus, I'm in there to talk to you about your process. So after you do the exercise, you'll be prompted to basically get in touch with me, tell me how it all went. I'll give you some feedback and we'll make sure that you have your next steps. And the membership itself has a whole path and framework for like different, depending on what you're working with. Does it make sense for you to go into guided somatic practices about creating safety in the body? Does it make sense for you to go to the guided somatic practices that are about self-trust or self-worth or being able to bring your whole self into relationships? There's so much for you to do your own little curriculum. And this work just really helps us understand why we are the way we are, why we are attracting the things that we are, and then how to heal it. The link for Becoming Secure is down there in the show notes. While you're down there, also click the thumbs up button and the subscribe button if you haven't already. Just let me know that this video was supportive for you so that I know that I'm reaching the people that I need to and that this information is helpful. So I hope to meet you inside Becoming Secure today. The link is in the description. I'll see you soon. Mwah.